All right, good morning, everyone. We'll be starting the class here in just a minute. Just wanted to let you all in the room, let you know you're in the right place. We'll be right back with you here in just a moment. All right, I have 9 o'clock. We'll go ahead and start with our introductory slides, and as people are still arriving before the feature of Steve giving us a great class today. So welcome to a virtual gardening class for August for SCV water. We're going to be talking about the top 30 plants for the Santa Clarita Valley. We are using the GoToWebinar format. On your screen, you should have a little box where it says questions, and you can click on that to expand it. And that's where you can type your questions in. We'll save the questions and answers for the end of the presentation, but you can enter them anytime if you've got questions that come to you along the way. That's no problem. And just to let you know, we are planning next month to switch to Zoom. And I know that's a platform that more people are familiar with. And it's going to integrate better with some other things that we do at our agency. If you have already signed up for a class through the end of the year, you'll get an email with the new Zoom link that will take you to the new location for the class. So it should be seamless on your end. And pretty soon, within the next week or so, the registration links on our website will switch so that if you sign up new to a class, you'll get the correct Zoom one from the beginning. Oops. Just quickly, in case anybody's not familiar with our agency, SCV Water is a regional water agency. We serve the entire Santa Clarita Valley. We've got about 74,000 retail service connections, and we were formed January 1, 2018, when several smaller water retailers all merged together. All right, quit doing it. There we go. We are in a nearly unprecedented drought right now. I'm sure you've seen lots of information in the news about it. LA County is not within the emergency declarations that the governor has issued, at least not yet, but there is a statewide call to ask for voluntary reduction of our water use by 15%. SCV Water has launched a page at droughtreadyscv.com, and you can go there to find lots of resources on water conservation, how to find and stop the leak, and all kinds of tips of how you can help us to save that 15% over 2020. And then one of the things we offer too is a lot of programs with conservation. So we've got some rebate programs, so you can help reduce your water use and also get some money back in the process. So check out conserve.yourscvwater.com for information on that. There's ones for irrigation, sprinkler timers, lawn replacement, and a couple others. Speaking of, I forgot this one was here. So smart irrigation controller. This is a great one. Pretty much any controller that you can control from your smartphone would be eligible, but if you go to our website, it'll give you a specific list, but you can get up to $150 back. And these things are smart, like they can have where they sense how they know what the weather's been, how much precipitation there's been, and help adjust your sprinklers automatically. We also offer a Water Smart workshop, and this is something you complete online in your home, and it teaches you how to specifically check different things in your home to make sure you're being as water efficient as you can. And at the end of it, you get a $20 bill, a $20 credit on your water bill. So simple, easy way to get a little bit of money back. And of course, there's also a lot of landscape resources. We've got the SCV's hottest plant guide that has 30 plants that thrive and survive in our area. There's also landscape tours. There are videos from our previous gardening classes. We record these and post them on our website. So if you missed one, you can go through and look at the topics there and get caught up. And finally, there's lots of ways to connect with us. I've given our website a few times, but we're also on all the main social media channels, and we share conservation tips and information on that. We invite you to join us. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our instructor today, Steve Williams. I'm going to give you a quick bio. He received his horticultural training at Mount San Antonio College in Walnut. He honed his skills at Descanso and Huntington Botanical Gardens, both just beautiful places, where he worked as garden staff and plant propagator and nursery manager for 10 years. He's been affiliated with the Master Gardeners since 1996. He did recently retire from teaching at Mount SAC, but we're super excited to have him here today and sharing his knowledge and expertise. So let me turn the screen over to you, Steve. Hold on.
I think I'm on the screen, Kathy.
You are, and I will just turn the sharing thing over to you since I find the right button. There we go.
Oops. No, I just lost it.
Oh, sorry.
What I had was right.
There we go. Okay. All yours. So I am going to mute and hide myself. And
Kathy, I'm still not getting the ability to go to my, oh, here it goes. It just turned on. Takes a moment. There we go.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the background and let you take over.
Very good. So, whoops, let me put that back again. It keeps wanting to disappear. That's why we're going to change to the new Zoom next time. So, welcome everybody.
I can see you. There, I can see you good. Yeah.
My pleasure to be here today. I have done other presentations for you in the past in person, and this is the first time I have done the Thrifty 30. But this is a great list of trees, shrubs, and ground cover for your region. So let's go ahead and get things going here. Hopefully it's going to want to work for us. Oh, there we go. So the plants that we're selecting today to show you are plants that have low to medium water use, and they are available locally, and they are grown in your region very successfully. So that's why they were chosen. So you know that inventories in your nurseries do change throughout the year. One of the better times to plant many of your plants is in the fall to overwinter and then be ready for next spring's growth. This is not a good time to plant. It's too darn hot out there, and you might not have success. So fall is a better time to plant. And so watering requirements for the plants. A newly planted tree or shrub, of course, needs to have proper watering for the first year to become acclimated, and then at that point in time we can change the watering schedule and reduce the watering after 1 year. So let's go ahead here and take a look here now. You know, one thing that does vary is where you live and what are called microclimates on your property. If you live in a valley, for example, depending on which side of the hill that you live on and where the sun shines during the day will vary your microclimates and your growing conditions. So let's take a look at some of these trees for your region. Here we have the first one is the Pistachio Chinensis, the Chinese pistachio tree. And that's not the nut, the pistachio. This is an ornamental tree. I do like the leaves that it has that are this pattern that they have is very attractive. The color, of course, in the fall, we get wonderful fall red and yellows. That's one of the attributes of this tree. It does produce a flower and a small red fruit that turns black, and those typically aren't really too edible. It is a great shade tree, and it's a specimen tree, and you know, the size of the tree, 30 to 40 feet in height and spread. So, you know, you do have to have room for many of these trees. There are some here that we'll be showing you that are smaller in stature, but size at maturity is always important for you to make note of how big that tree will be when it's mature. A good resource for that is the Sunset Western Garden book, where you can get that type of information about plants at maturity. So the Pistachio Chinensis, the root system is not invasive, which is an important feature of the tree. Some trees, of course, we have issues, and that's important depending on where you plant it, near foundations, sewer lines, water lines, etc. You have to be careful where you plant your trees that's with an invasive root system that it does not compromise. Let's take a look at another one here. We have the Quercus ilex, or the holly oak. Now, there are many oak trees. This is one in particular that may be a little bit smaller in stature than some of the others. It still can grow 30 to 60 feet in height. Mediterranean origins. Oak trees in general have what we call a dome shape, kind of a rounded shape to them, and they do require full sun. They can tolerate many different types of soils, and the holly oak is one of the fastest growing. So in a landscape, it will give you that beauty and value much sooner than the live oak, for example, which would take much longer to mature. So it is evergreen. It tolerates wind. It's a great tree to provide habitat for wildlife. Oaks in general are known to provide for many, many different critters in the world, and that's very important. Certain trees can be planted in lawn or turf areas. You know, it's really not advisable because typically turf or grass and trees have different watering requirements. But this can tolerate lawn planting. Okay, but keep in mind that in general, we typically like to not have turf underneath a tree because of the different watering requirements. So here's another wonderful tree, the Japanese blueberry, the Eleocarpus. Again, height can be 30 to 60 feet. Now, pruning can be done as the tree is growing to reduce that stature and keep it at a shorter height. The spread on this is 20 to 30 wide. It is evergreen. Now, the older leaves, as time goes forward, do turn red and fall off, and of course, that's an attractive feature as well. It does bloom in the summer, very, very small flowers, as you can see here. Very little pruning, but it can be pruned into a hedge or to keep the height of that tree. It has an upright growth habit, as you can see here on this growth. It has kind of upward pattern, but a very lovely tree for ornamental use in the garden. The Lagerstromias, the Crepe Myrtles, of which there are many, and they oftentimes are grown as a multi-trunk or a single trunk tree. Sometimes can be actually a shrub form as well. Very showy flowers in the summertime. They're in bloom right now. Now, white flowers are common, but you're going to find that your Lagerstromias are going to actually white, lavender, pink, red, or rose flowers. So, you know, for trees that are blooming trees, it is important that you see them when they're in flower at the nursery, so that the color, the shade of the color is one that you want, that you had in mind, because they can vary quite a bit. So seeing a tree in bloom, blooming tree is important for your landscape. Now, the Crepe Myrtles can tolerate a wide range of watering regimes. They can actually, once established, be quite drought tolerant. They can be grown in narrow planting areas along parkways in the street, for example. They're used as accent trees, small shade trees, I said narrow parkways. In the fall, they also get beautiful color as the leaves turn to a beautiful orange color before they fall. It does go deciduous during the winter, loses its leaves entirely. But beautiful trees and shrubs as well, shrub forms, and many different colors that you can choose from. So one of my favorite trees, the Palo Verdes, the Parkinsonias, this particular one is to look for the Desert Museum, which is a hybrid. It's actually a cross between 3 different Parkinsonia trees. the Parkinsonia floridum, microphyllum, and the Aculita. Now, what it does in combining these different trees is that we have the best features of all three. One of the things is that, of course, we're going to have a beautiful bloom here during the summers, late spring into summertime. It has this fine textured foliage. Now, if it were one of the original forms of the Parkinsonia, you would have had seed pods. This hybrid form of the Desert Museum has very, very few of those seed pods to deal with. It's a great tree for slopes. It's a great accent tree, definitely very drought tolerant. Makes a wonderful tree for a statement. The Desert Museum Palo Verde. Another favorite of mine is the Arbutus Unito, the strawberry tree, which is actually a tree that, again, can be multi-trunked, single-trunked, can be sheared into more of a shrub form, but it does produce these beautiful bell-shaped white flowers, and then ultimately a lovely red fruit, which, although it is beautiful, isn't very tasty. I've heard of people using it to make jams or wine. You need to add a lot of sugar to it to bring out any flavor because it's pretty bland. Now, another thing to consider about this is that the tree itself, where you locate it, it probably wouldn't be a good spot along the parkway, as this falling fruit could potentially present a slip and fall hazard, and we don't need any lawsuits, so be careful of where you do plant it. The bark of the tree peels off and has real interesting features on the tree trunk itself as the bark peels off. So it's a good lawn tree, again, can be used in the lawn area. It does have to have good drainage, so it's important that in that lawn area, it's not being overwatered, and it takes drought better than it does overwatering. It can be planted as a single accent tree, a multi-trunk, or grouped together to form a windbreak. And as I said, I've even seen them pruned into more of a shrub form as well. So it's a good small residential tree. The size is only 20 to 30 feet, a little smaller than some of the others, and can be kept in check. But it's a beautiful tree and beautiful bark and trunk on the tree itself. So moving right into shrubs. And,
hey, Steve.
Yes?
Steve, since you have these nice sections in your presentation, what if we do the Q&A related to the section before we go on? Would that be right?
Let's do that.
So we just have 2 questions on trees.
Okay.
Holly says, I have the Chinese pistache and have yet to see the red colors in the fall after about 4 to 5 years. Is this a male-female thing, or?
No, unfortunately, global warming has a lot to do with it. Cold weather helps bring on that fall color. And as things are warming up, we're not seeing as much of that as we may have had. And I would attribute it to that more than anything.
Okay.
Okay.
Nancy said on the flowering trees, for example, the crepe myrtles, what kind of drop of foliage can we expect? Like she's wondering about how much cleanup there is to do with those trees.
The crepe myrtles, for example, aren't very messy. They hold of course, they are deciduous and they will drop their leaves come wintertime, one time. The rest of the year, they hold their foliage very well. Now, we're going to talk about that with shrubs, a little something with shrubs as far as flowers are concerned. But no, it's not a messy tree. It's a very easy tree to maintain. And again, low water use once it's started.
Okay, and then just one more. Don wants to know if Japanese maples do well out here.
Well, that's very marginal. You would have to really provide it the proper conditions, which, in many cases, the green colored ones can take a little bit more sun, but the trees that have the reddish foliage are more sensitive to light and may need to be an understory and in part shade. And I even know folks who have grown Japanese maples in containers, so they can move the container around to different parts of their property seasonally so that it's not in the full sun. So the simple answer to that is not an easy thing to do. You know, I always recommend with something like that, for example, I'm not pushing, I don't have stock in any particular nursery, but Armstrong Nurseries does have a lifetime warranty on trees and shrubs. So that if you failed, keep your receipt and you can go back and get another tree. Okay.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for the trees. Do you want to go ahead and move on to shrubs?
All right. So let's move on here and take a look at some shrubs here. So a favorite of mine is the Calisthenics citrinus, the Little John. Now, some of you are familiar with bottle brushes, and they can be huge 20-foot tall shrubs that become very problematic and require a lot of care. But this is a wonderful plant. The Little Johns were developed, and how did it come about? You know, having a smaller sized tree is often done by crossbreeding, but it's also done by selection. Let's say you grow 10 shrubs or 10 trees, and one of those happens to be a third of the height of the others, much shorter. So then they'll keep propagating from that shorter stature tree, and then ultimately they can have a nursery full of short trees. So we oftentimes get them that way. Now, this original plant here is from Australia, the bottle brushes, but the Little John is one that's only going to be 3 to 5 foot tall, 4 to 6 wide. And there are even more versions of the Little John. There's one that's called a Better John, which is supposed to root in and acclimate much easier than the regular Little John. So you might want to look for the Better John. And again, the size of these, they can be pruned even shorter. A hint on bottle brush in general. The proper time to prune them is after flowering. And, you know, you want to cut it just below that flower, and then it'll stay short and bushy that way. Now, there are other shrubs as well that are flowering shrubs that will flower, let's say, in the springtime. And on one example that I know of in my garden is yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the Brunsfelsia. When it's through flowering is when I want to go in the springtime and cut it back, because many of our flowering shrubs bloom on new wood. So if we wait to cut back those flowering shrubs in the fall, they wouldn't have an opportunity to develop new wood, and you wouldn't have any blooms the next year. So the hint is, on a flowering shrub, you prune it in the spring right after it blooms. It develops new wood for the following season then to provide wonderful blooms again. So the bottle brush again, the flowers appear intermittently during warm weather. And of course, our weather, as it's getting warmer all the time, we're finding that it will bloom a good part of the year. Here you can see one that is grown, and its size again will stay 2-3 foot in height. It can be a mass planting, a foundation plant, border plant. I've seen it used out in parkways. It does attract bees and hummingbirds. They love those red flowers, and it can take heat, aridity, smog. Now, like with many of our plants, our soils in Southern California tend to be pretty heavy clay, and that can be a problem. So in particular for this one here, if it's in heavy clay-like soil, it will bind up the nutrients and make the iron unavailable, and then you'll get a yellowing on the plant. So to overcome a yellowing where the leaves are entirely yellow, we can add a little bit of iron, and there's some products on the market. Ironite is one of them, and it will reverse that chlorotic or yellowing on the plant. The Calisthenics are low frost sensitive, but again, our winters are becoming much milder now. So as we go forward, that's not going to be much of an issue. I know that in your areas, you can have more frost than where I live in the San Gabriel Valley. But again, this is a wonderful plant, one of my favorites in landscaping. Low maintenance, beautiful, great plant. Okay, other great plants, lavenders, and there's so many. This happens to be the English lavender. I also love the Spanish lavender, but the lavenders in general, 1 to 1.5 foot in height, and the spread is about the same. They are of Mediterranean origins, and let's talk a little bit about that. Here in Southern California, we are considered a Mediterranean climate, although many folks have in the past called us a desert. That's not really true. But the Mediterranean climate is a little bit more coastal, where you folks are more inland. You're developing different types of climatic conditions, but Mediterranean plants work wonderful in our landscapes, and this is one of them. So being a herbaceous plant, it grows year-round. It doesn't really lose its leaves and go deciduous, but a hint on lavenders in general is that after they're blooming through the summer and you come along to the following spring, you want to cut the plant back yearly, because that will prevent you from getting a lot of woody material. Lavenders are kind of known to become woody. So if we cut them back, we'll prevent the woodiness, we'll get new growth and have new flowering every year. Wonderful scent on the lavenders, used for sachets and things. You know, there's events that take place in Southern California, lavender events, where they serve it in different ways with teas and different things. I personally don't like the taste, but it does have a wonderful scent. So here you have it used as a hedge type material and as a border or a hedge or a mass planting. It does attract bees and butterflies. And even moisture, drip irrigation is a good way to water your lavender garden. Good drainage, as with many the Mediterranean plants. You know, in the Mediterranean region where they're from, they grow on hillsides. So the water tends to flow off and the root systems are never too wet. And that's a problem here with our heavy clay soils, is to provide that good drainage so the root system isn't too wet and you don't get root rot. Kikilia, the heart-leafed Kikilia. Now, this plant is going to grow 1 to 3 foot, yet it can kind of climb up other plants and give you a height of up to 8 feet. So as far as its breadth, 3 to 5 foot wide, it is a California native. Semi-evergreen. Again, depending on the climate, it will lose some of that foliage in the fall. It does have these beautiful flowers in late spring through early summer that are attractive to wildlife. Hummingbirds are especially attracted to it. And again, they call it a climbing penstemon, even though it's not really a penstemon, but commonly called a climbing penstemon because it kind of has a habit to climb up other plants. So it works well on slopes, for example, to cover areas, ground covering your slope region. And, you know, I like on a slope to have a mixed planting rather than one entire ground cover of one material. It's nice to have a mixed planting. It's more interesting. You can provide better for wildlife habitat than throughout the year by having different blooming and fruiting times on those plants as well. Okay, different junipers, and this one is the Japanese garden juniper. And Nana, you notice the word Nana. When we see that, that means dwarf. So this is one that's going to be less than 1 foot in height. Its breadth will be 4 to 6 feet in width. And that's the great thing about some of these prostate junipers, is they will spread out and serve as a ground cover. Partial to full sun. It has kind of a blue-green foliage, which is real interesting in the garden. And many of the junipers have that blue-green color. Deer don't like to eat it, because I think you probably have deer up in your region. And when it gets cold in the winter, it will get a purplish hue to the foliage. Okay, and that's oftentimes happens with plants in cold weather. So as you can see here, it forms a dense mat and it creeps and has this wonderful ground cover ability here. It takes drought, poor soils, can be an accent plant, works well in kind of an Asian or Japanese style gardens. Little to no maintenance. And again, it's very prostate, it grows very flat over the soil area. So junipers in general, and this is a good one, the Procumbens Nana juniper. A favorite of mine here as well is the pink fairy duster. This is a plant that 1 to 3 foot. I've seen them maybe as 4 feet tall or so, and 4 to 5 feet around. It's native to the southwest desert regions here in Arizona, New Mexico, and California. It will actually form a branching structure. It is sensitive to frost, but it has this bottle brush type flower on it, which is very attractive to hummingbirds as well. And the blooms occur spring to summer. It really wants to be grown in full sun. It will tolerate drought once established. Now, remember that we say it tolerates drought. That's on a plant that has had that 1 year of establishment. And when you plant a plant in the fall, you'll want to provide throughout the first winter, if we have a dry winter, even moisture as we get into that first spring as well. And through that first summer, it may be even weekly or every 2 weeks on a newly planted plant. After 1 year and it's established, you can then reduce your watering schedule, and depending on the plant, it may be as little as once every 3 weeks, depending on the plants. Well-drained soil is the key, and many of us have heavy clay soils. How can we change that soil so that it has better drainage? Pumice is one of the ways that is used by landscapers coming into that site where you have that heavy, dense clay soil, and in that top foot of soil, rototilling in pumice. And this is readily available at a good landscape supply company and in bulk. And it really does help because it adds a larger particle size. The reason why we have poor drainage, because our clay soils have very, very fine particles that are packed together and don't allow the water to move through it. Whereas if we add a larger particle size, like pumice, that allows that water movement to take place. Okay, pink fairy duster. Lantanas, and there are different lantanas. The montavinensis, the purple trailing lantanas, only 1 to 2 foot in height, and they spread 8 to 10 feet. Origins of South America, purple flowers, full sun. Now, we do have to be careful because they can get this dead undergrowth, so pruning them back severely in the spring will, as I've mentioned before, will encourage new growth and more flowers. Overwatering and too much fertilizer might inhibit deflowering. So hold back on that once the plant's established. Don't overwater or over-fertilize them. So it flowers almost year-round. It does have kind of a unpleasant odor on the foliage, and the flowers themselves produce a little black berry, which is poisonous. Now, animals don't tend to eat it. Animals learn through experience, or it's passed on genetically, what to eat and what not to eat. But for small children, you certainly want your child, you wouldn't want them to go out and pick these berries and eat them. So be careful of that. It does take extreme heat, but it's subject to frost damage. So that's something to be careful of depending on your microclimate on your property, making sure you can provide that warmer area for the plant. It's great on slopes, as a ground cover, as a turf substitute. But not only do we have the trailing lantanas, but we also have the Lantana camera. And these you may have seen in landscapings with the yellow or the gold colored flower. And this is called new gold. It's the yellow trailing. And I really am partial to those. I really think they're outstanding. So whether you go with the purple trailing or the Lantana camera, which is the new gold yellow trailing, you'll have a wonderful plant in your landscape. Cottony Asters. They are native to China. They are only 1 to 2 foot in height, which is, and there are some that are very, very prostate and very low to the ground. They spread 4 to 5 feet. So, you know, when we are doing research on planting a new plant in your garden, you want to see what the spread is so that you don't plant the plants too close together. We want plants to be able to grow together but not compromise each other. So overplanting is oftentimes a problem. People want to have that instant satisfaction of a garden that's beautiful right from the get-go, but it's better to look at your sunset book, for example, and check on the breadth of a plant. And remember, the first year a plant sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. And so in that third year, your plant's ground cover type material are kind of filling in to their size. So give them 3 years and plant accordingly. So these plants are semi-deciduous to evergreen, depending on the varieties and where they're planted. But in the wintertime, they may lose that foliage. They have white flowers in the summer, followed by red berries that last the entire summer. And so they're very, very lovely in that respect, of the green foliage and the red berries on this prostate plant. But as I said, allow for that spreading habit. Do not overplant. And also, plants like this, we don't want to plant them too close to the edge of a walkway, for example, where we would have to be pruning it all the time. We want it to have a natural appearance. So that means really kind of letting it grow over the edges and not do that pruning to have an unnatural look. Great for slopes and mass plantings, good for erosion control, rock gardens. It handles the dry soil once established, and very, very little maintenance. So Cottony Aster horizontalis. Cystis, the rock rose, and these can grow to 4 foot in height and 4 to 6 foot spread. They're of Mediterranean origins. They are evergreen and have a kind of a mounding form. The biggest blooms are in the spring through summer, but they can bloom throughout the year. The flowers are purple, with typically we'll have these spots on them. Sometimes we'll call them 5-spot. And now here you can see how lovely this can be, and especially when it's in bloom like this. So it prefers, once established, to be grown more in a drought type of situation, in well-drained soil, and not be overwatered. Full sun to part shade. Now, some folks have had difficulty growing these and killing them prematurely, but it's probably because they are overwatering. So provide good drainage, water to become established. Once established, cut way back on that watering schedule, and the plant will be happy. We don't want to do harsh pruning on this plant, tip pruning only, and it works well on slopes for erosion control, an informal hedge, and it attracts butterflies. I'm always looking for plants in the garden that are attractive to wildlife. It's very important, and particularly native plants for our native wildlife as well. Raphaelephus, and these plants can grow to 4 to 6 foot in height typically. They even at times I've seen them trained into a single trunk tree form, but typically grown as a hedge or a shrub. Origins, Japan, white flowers from spring through June. You want to, here again, prune immediately after it blooms in the spring to encourage that new growth so that you'll have blooms the next season. You don't want to wait late in the season to do your pruning, because you'll be cutting off that new wood and you won't have any blooms the next year. So this follows true with many of our flowering shrubs, is to bloom immediately after blooms in the springtime. Full sun for best blooming, yet they will tolerate half shade to heavier shade. Note that when we get into that shade, they will not be blooming as well. But they will take a wide variety of soils, which, again, providing good drainage for many of our plants is important. This one can handle many different soil types, and it isn't as critical. So this one is the Raphaelephus Umbilita minor. Again, the word minor means dwarf. So the yellow hawthorn, or Raphaelephus, is in shorter stature than some of the other Raphaelephus. It will also tolerate shearing, but remember to do it right after blooming. It can have some fungal problems, so to help prevent that, prevent overhead watering. It would be better to water the soil area When we water foliage that is susceptible to fungal situations, the water on the leaves then are where those fungal spores will proliferate and infect the plant. And typically, of course, watering our gardens, early morning is the best time. If we water in the afternoon, evening, that is a time when the warm evening conditions make the plants more susceptible to fungal diseases. So watering early morning, the sun comes out, the foliage can dry off, and it helps prevent those fungal type situations. Okay, so do we have any questions on our shrubs?
We do have a couple. Let's see. So one question, and she followed up later, is can you speak a little bit about what does well in full, partial, or very little sun? She has those areas all around her house. Then she noticed that you did address sun and shade preference on some of them, but could you mention a few flowering, wildlife-loving shrubs that grow in mostly shade?
So the trees that I mentioned that can handle shade can handle shade. All the others typically want to be grown in full sun. That's
Okay.
usually the standard is full sun, unless we say they can handle shade.
Okay.
So that's kind of the general rule of thumb there. And then what was your other question then?
So she was wondering if you had any suggestions for flowering, wildlife-loving shrubs that would do well in mostly shade.
Well, yes, there are things. Now the California Native Plant Society has a really good website that you might want to go to. And in that website, you can actually type in your zip code, and it will come up with a list of California native plants for your zone. And it will also give information about which wildlife are attracted to those particular plants. It also has a subsection on butterflies in general. So when you put in your zip code, you can come up with a list of butterflies that live in your region. And again, you can cross-reference that with the plants and plant the plants that provide for those butterflies. So that is the California Native Plant Society. You might want to check out that website, and that will really help you out with that type of information.
That's a great resource. I'll paste the link to that in the chat here in just a second. And then one last one. I don't know if you can quickly summarize, of the shrubbery that you were featuring, do many of them have stickers, thorns?
No, none of those did.
Okay.
And of the trees, we had the Parkinsonia tree. Originally, the original variety did, but the new refined one that's out does not have thorns. So no, none of these have thorns on them.
Okay. All right. That's it on shrubs.
Let's go ahead
Thanks.
then and take a look here at our last section on perennials. And Salvia Greg Eye. This is a great plant. It's actually native to Texas, and of course, climatically, they have hot weather there as we do. This plant, I have one in my front yard that I've had here for 30 years. My only mistake was I planted it too close to the sidewalk, and I have to prune it back. So always keep in mind again, this is 3 to 6 feet around and 2 to 3 foot high, that you don't want to have to unnaturally prune plants. You want them to grow more naturally. So where you select a plant is very important. This plant, once established, again, after that first year of establishment, very low water requirements. Hummingbirds and bumblebees love it. I have regular visitors out here all day on slopes, an informal border, understory under oaks because of its low water requirements. You know, oak trees, once established, we generally don't water them during the summertime for fear of establishing an oak root fungus that can infect the tree, the roots of the tree, and kill it. So plants that can be planted underneath an oak tree are ones that you want to select that have very low requirements, and so that you wouldn't have to be providing that summer irrigation. So as I say, this Salvia Greg Eye does have an upright growth habit, and there are actually color variations from pinks to more red type colors. And as you can see here, as a hedge type, it works also in containers. It has very fast growth rate. Now, it blooms year-round. What I do, though, is when we get into late fall and winter, the plant starts to look a little shabby. So I cut it back in the wintertime, and immediately I get new growth, and it starts to bloom again. It just doesn't want to stop. But you've pulled the plant down and reduced the size and cleaned it up, and it's going to start blooming again immediately. It's a wonderful plant. It does have a little funky smell to it as well. It's not my favorite odor on that plant, but besides that, it's a great plant. Gallardia, another plant that I use in my landscape, and it works well for you. I have it planted around my mailbox out by the street where I have no irrigation. Now, it does well spring through early summer, and then it burns out a bit. At that point in time, the flowers produce a seed head. I get in there with my hands and I rub those seeds in that bed. I remove all of my dead flowers for the year, and then come next winter, those seeds germinate and I have the flowers come back again. Now, this Galaria Grandiflora is perennial and typically can live on, but it also will grow from seed, as I said. A long bloom period, early summer to late fall, if it has enough irrigation. The flowers can be red, orange, yellow. They've actually have new hybrids of these, new color combinations, but it's a really great flowering plant in your garden. So Galaria Grandiflora, again, that well-drained soil, once established, moderate watering. I probably don't give mine enough. If I did, it would probably bloom much longer, live longer. If it's in too heavy shade, it's not going to bloom as well, and that's true with many plants. They want full sun. And planting them 12 to 18 inches on center or apart will allow them to grow together. And again, it will overseed and grow from seed very easily. But a really great plant in the garden, can take the heat, but give it a little moderate watering. I don't think I water mine quite enough. Achilles, and actually native to different parts of the northern hemisphere, including here in parts of California. The height 2 to 3 foot, the spread 2 to 3 foot. There are different flowering colors, from white to red to pale yellow to light pink. The foliage color has kind of a gray to grayish green color. I love plants in the garden that have gray foliage, and this is one that gives us that. Another would be artichoke plants, for example, have interesting colors on their foliage, striking. So this plant can become a little invasive because it develops underground runners and can spread by the underground runners. So keep it in check as to where it's at. The hybrids, the colored varieties that are the reds and pinks and so on, typically aren't as aggressive as the mother plant, the Achillea millefolium. So it blooms spring through fall, full sun, it attracts butterflies, it wants that good drainage. It can take poor soil, but you want to make sure that you don't overwater in that heavy soil, because overwatering could be a death to the plant. It's commonly used in mass plantings or replacement of a turf or ground cover type application. So there are many penstemons that can be used in our landscapes, and throughout the United States there are penstemons all over. Many of them native here in California. So this one grows 24 to 36 inches, native to the southwest desert regions. It will spread 16 to 18 inches. Very drought tolerant once established, attractive to hummingbirds, butterflies that love these tubular red colored flowers that they can get down in there to get their nectar. Partial to full sun. Again, those tubular flowers are really interesting. Blooms early spring to early summer. Through early summer, attracting butterflies. Good drainage is always critical. And again, trying to provide that maybe on a slight slope or hillside would work as well. So if you have that heavy soil, once it's established, making sure that you don't overwater it is important, because it doesn't want to have wet feet. That's where we get root rot on these plants if they're in heavy soil. and the roots stay wet too long. But it's typically used in mass plantings, borders, rock gardens, hillsides. Firecracker penstemon. Now, I want to mention another penstemon, which is one of my favorites, the Penstemon heterophyllus margarita bob, which is the foothill or mountain penstemon. It has blue, kind of purplish blue flowers, and it's a native to our region and does very, very well here. And it was actually discovered at a nursery down in San Diego County area, Las Politas Nursery. And they're now located in the Central Valley. But that's another good nursery to go to, Las Politas Nursery, to look for native plants and find information on native plants. Okay. So geranium, and this one in particular, Johnson's Blue, which is a true geranium, and it's native to North America, 15 to 18 inches height, 2 to 3 foot in spread. So once established, it can be quite drought tolerant, but it does want to have that regular irrigation to get it established initially. It's usually in a mass planting or as a border, and it blooms late spring to fall. It is fast growing, with a mounding habit, and really prefers full sun, and it can be used in containers. Now, it can become almost invasive in times. So keep it in check and don't let it take over your property, but it forms a nice mounding plant with beautiful blue flowers. Johnson's Blue. The Stakes, this is your lamb's ear, and up to 12 inches in height, and notice it has that wonderful gray colored foliage, and the leaves are soft and fuzzy and pleasant to touch. It can handle some shade, but typically does better in sun. It will form a dense ground cover and will take different types of soils, even heavier soils. And it does need that room in order for it to spread and be your ground cover. And notice here how they've utilized it and allowed it to grow over the edges. Again, you don't want to come in and be cutting the edges of these and giving it an unnatural look. You want to keep it as natural looking as possible. So used in borders, it attracts your butterflies, in rock gardens as well. So lamb's ears, fuzzy little leaves. Heucheras. So we were speaking of plants to use as an understory under oak trees. This would be one that would be a good one. Once established, it can get by with very little summer irrigation. There are many heucheras out there that are hybrids. This one is the Heuchera macrantha Pallas purple, which is nice because the foliage, as you can see, has the underside of the leaf is a purple color and green on top. It has a mounding habit, shade to filtered sunlight. So it doesn't want to be in full sun, as I mentioned. An understory plant underneath an oak tree would be ideal. It does bloom in the summertime, but there are many heucheras out there. Flowers will range from white to corals, pinks, and oftentimes we're actually growing our heucheras for the foliage rather than the flowers because there's such a wide range of foliage available on these. They can form an informal border, mass plantings, as I said, a tree understory, well-drained soil, and they do attract butterflies. If you have never visited California Garden in Montclair area, it once was called, let's see, what is it called? Well, they changed the name recently to California Gardens. It's a California native plant garden, and they have wonderful collections of heucheras there, as well as many other California native plants. So you may want to take a visit out there to that garden someday. Okay. Here's our, I think it's our last one here is Hemerocallis, which are your daylilies. Now, daylilies are going to grow to 3 foot height on the flowering stems. The foliage oftentimes is about 1 to 2 foot. Mediterranean origins. The foliage is a green strap-like foliage, and the plants grow into a clumping habit. Full sun to part shade, typically blooming better in a little more sunlight. The bloom time is spring to fall. And this particular one is called Pardon Me Daylilies. But there are many different varieties out there. Mass planting, borders, parkways, slopes, container growing. and tolerates many different soil types. And we can propagate these very easily, but you must dig and remove the root portion as well as the upper leaf portion and really get a good clump of those roots in order to be successful. Now again, there's a great grower. I don't have any stock in this company or anything, but in the Somas area, which I think is fairly close to you guys, Greenwood daylilies, John and Cynthia Schustra. John's been doing this for many, many years and has a great collection of daylilies as well as other plants there for sale. It makes a nice day trip to the Somas area. So flowers range in color, typically warm colored flowers, but there are even in the pinks you'll find. There are some that were called rebloomers that will rebloom over a period of time. One thing about the daylilies, they're not self-cleaning. So when this flowering stem is done and the flowers dried up and the stem has died back, you need to physically pull out or remove that dead flowering stem. They're not self-cleaning. Oh, one more here, rosemary. So rosemaries, great plant of Mediterranean origins. This one here is the prostate variety, which is only going to grow 1 to 2 foot in height. There are other upright varieties that are going to grow 5 to 6 feet tall. Aromatic, low-growing shrub, fast spreading growth habit, good ground cover. It has these showy purple to bluish colored flowers in the springtime. Full sun definitely attracts bees in the garden. So if you have bee allergies, something to consider because you get a lot of bees on this and butterflies. Usually in a mass planting, but of course remember that we want to allow for this 8-foot spread and not plant them too close together to allow for that spread. They can take most soil types, used on cascading hillsides, over walls, in pots and in planter areas. It can be invasive, but it can be pruned back as well. Now there are some varieties that are specifically used for cooking. And one of those is the Chef's Choice rosemary, which is more of an upright variety. There's also the Huntington has a variety that came from the Huntington Gardens, which is also great for cooking. It has a little bit more of the higher oil content and a spicier flavor. I love the scent of the rosemary. Just rubbing up against it, I think, is very pleasant. Personal choice. So I think that, oh, we still have another one here. I keep thinking we're done. The Russian sage. The Russian sage is not a sage plant at all, but it's commonly called Russian sage, Purovska atriptylifolia. 3 to 4 foot in height, 3 to 4 foot in spread. It does originate from Russia. It is perennial and has these beautiful flowers on it and that gray-green foliage. So here you can see that beautiful flowering that these guys will have. It's considered a fire-wise plant. I guess it doesn't catch fire very easily. Used in mass plantings, a background plant, summer blooms, attracting butterflies, full sun or reflected heat. Now, what does it mean by reflected heat? That means it could be planted on your west or east side of your home, up against the building, where the sunlight is going to beat against that wall and then reflect off of the wall back on the plant. So the plant's actually getting heat first from the sun hitting on it and then reflected off of the building. It's getting 2 heat sources. So there's only certain plants that can handle that, and this is one that can. So the Russian sage is great, beautiful blue flowers on that. And there is another one here, stone crops. I was first introduced to stone crops back in Illinois, and they do a beautiful job back there of growing spring and summer flower gardens, and this one fits so well. But we can grow it here. The height of the plant, 1 to 2 foot, 1 to 2 foot spread. Origins in China, and there are many different sedums out there, from large flowering to very small ground cover choices. Pink flower, summer through fall, full sun, well-drained soil. And as you can see here, maybe mixed plantings with other plants in the landscape, grown in containers, and it is attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies. It makes a great container plant. it does in cold winter time tends to die back and go a little bit more deciduous in the winter time, and then comes back in the spring. The tick seed, the Coreopsis. This is a little short flowering plant, only 12 inches in height. I just saw these the other day at Home Depot in containers. They're really cute little plants covered with these little 1 to 1.5 inch wide yellow flowers. And origins, Mexico, southern United States. They are perennial and have this mounding form, but they are only 12 inches in height. Good for a hot, dry area, can handle that type of condition. Here you can see this mass planting here. Yellow flowers that bloom over a long period of time from spring through winter, and great in this mass planting borders, spot, or colors. And it does attract butterflies in the garden. Now, you know that as far as flower colors in the garden, I mentioned before that blue colored flowers like on rosemary attract bees, but also yellow flowers attract bees and butterflies in the garden. Think of in your vegetable garden, your squash plants have yellow flowers. So nature made those flowers yellow, or they work together that yellow flower attracts the bees so they can pollinate the plant and provide your produce. So nature works together wonderfully, and there's an example of yellow flowers in the garden. So any questions on our perennial plants?
Let's see. A question about rosemary. Do they reach a point where it's best to just remove them and replace them?
So, you know, on the prostate varieties, not so much as in the upright varieties. They might get real woody. So, again, they're not a plant that we typically do a lot of pruning on. So, making that proper choice in the beginning, I'd say the prostate varieties would give you less of that deadwood situation and would last over a longer period of time. But
Okay. A couple of these are a little bit more general, but we'll go through them since they're here. If someone needed to source all of these plants that they were basically starting from scratch with landscaping, should they wait until fall? I think you said something similar earlier.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't even be the person who goes nursery shopping and says, ooh, I love that plant, and you buy it now, and it sits in that pot and dies over the summer. So, you know, let the nursery man keep that plant, and then you buy it at the proper time when it's in its ideal condition.
Good suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, someone jumped back to trees on pepper trees. They have an overgrown pepper tree, and they're worried about the root system.
Yes.
And their home foundation. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, those pepper trees, the California or the Brazilian pepper trees are both nuisance trees. Also because of the seedlings that they drop. The seeds that are dropped, seedlings everywhere, and somewhat invasive roots. I never would suggest using those as a landscape plant, but you have one already. So if it's a mature tree, yes, it is a good shade tree. And in the right spot, it's not going to be an invasive problem with water lines or sewer lines or foundations. So it could be used in the right place, even on a hillside. But in the wrong place, it can wreak havoc. So that's about all I can say on that.
Okay, and then one last question. Coreopsis, is that an annual or a perennial?
No, it's actually a perennial. And believe it or not, although you know, sometimes we'll treat plants like this more annually, depending on how well they survive through our winters and so on. But if you get the right spot for this plant, it can survive for several years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's it.
Okay, let's then go ahead here with our last little section here on ground covers. And here's a common one, this Festuca ovina glauca. And I like the kind of bluish gray color of this foliage. It grows to be 6 to 12 inches in height and spread. So when planting these, of course, you want to make sure to not plant them too close. You want to allow them to grow together and not overwhelm each other. Grass-like blades in clumps. Now, they may turn gray to brown as they get more mature, at which time you can cut the plant back and it will get new growth on it. The flowering plumes are usually a tan color, but you might have one that has a pink or white colored flower on it. But they're not very, very large. The flowers are not really that noticeable. But you can see a mass planting here with that beautiful kind of bluish gray accent here. Design feature with contrasting colors and textures used in the garden. Great for borders, ground covers, turf substitute. In pots at the base of other plants in that container garden. Don't overwater, and especially in cold soils as we come out of springtime, if we overwater them, they could suffer. So remember to plant them far enough apart to allow for them to grow together, so 12 to 15 inches apart. Okay, so the Festuca ovina glauca. Daimondia became very popular several years ago. From South Africa. It's only 2 to 4 inches in height. It has small yellow flowers, which throughout the year, but the leaves themselves have a little white stripe along the edge, so it's kind of an interesting color on that, and whitish on the underside. It handles dry areas very well with irregular irrigation. So an area of neglect, it can handle some foot traffic, but not regular foot traffic, but it can handle it occasionally. It's a great substitute. It does well between stepping stones in that type of situation, and plant them 12 inches apart to allow them to grow together. Now, I have seen in one of my landscape customers a situation where they've had some sort of a fungal situation, and I haven't checked it recently, but coming out of winter time, it's situation with some dieback on that. But a well-drained soil would be better for this, but easy to grow and pretty tough plant. Myoporum, the parvifolium, again, only 3 to 6 inches in height, and native to Australia. Rapid growing ground cover. Plant it far enough apart because its spread is 6 to 8 feet. So plant them far enough apart to allow the plants to grow together. Usually used on slopes, and so it can be used as a turf substitute for a low growth, compact type of situation. So interestingly enough, all of the myoporums, of which there are others, if you take one of the leaves and hold it up to the light, there are little translucent dots that you can actually, like a stained glass window almost, and you can see the light through these translucent dots. It's very interesting. It does have little white flowers that are very insignificant, and it has to have good drainage, and that's where on a slope it's a good place where the water does roll off. Space them far enough apart so that you get that coverage without compromising them. And there's a variety called Puta Creek that is a little taller version that will grow up to 18 inches in height, but most people want the dense, slow, low version. Okay. And there I think we came to the end of that. Now, let's see here. Do I stop sharing my webcam here? I think, there we go. Let's try that again. Are there any other questions on these plants or in general? You are hearing?
Yep, I'm not seeing any right now. Does anybody else have any questions about anything that Steve has talked about today, or anything in general on
other general questions, horticultural questions?
Right. I guess doing it along the way was.
Any pest or problems of that nature going on in your gardens? Open for problems or questions you might have.
Let's see here, we got a few coming in now. Okay. I think we kind of addressed this one, but this person was asking just in general with pretty much everything. Do you suggest planting in the fall?
Sorry about the dogs. Do I suggest what?
Planting in the fall for pretty much anything?
In most cases, although there are some trees, a few that prefer spring planting, but those are few and far in between. compared to the fall planting. And as well as your shrubs, perennials, ground covers. This hot temperatures up to 110 degrees is just too harsh for our plants to get them acclimated. Even a vegetable garden, you know, it should have been planted late winter, early spring, and planting a vegetable garden now is difficult as well through the summertime.
Okay, let's see. Moles, what to do?
So there's actually a product out there that is, oh gosh, let me think what it is.
Oh, and then somebody also asked about squirrels.
Okay, so there's a product out there that is based on castor beans, and it is a granular product that you can spread over a lawn area, and it penetrates down and it coats the grub in the soil that the moles would be eating, and then they don't like that, and then they're going to leave your garden. So what the name of the product is, I can't think offhand, but it's been around for many years. There are also devices out there that you can place in your garden that's supposed to make a clapping sound in the soil, vibration in the soil that's supposed to scare them away. I'm not sure that those are going to really do much for you. Trapping is another option. There are mole traps that are specifically for moles, and you could go online and find those, and that would be another option. Squirrels are a big problem, particularly with fruit trees and eating your fruit. I even had a squirrel one time eat the leaves off of a tree and in the springtime and ate all the leaves and killed my tree by eating all the leaves off of it. Now, one thing, of course, we have bird netting that we can use to cover our trees for birds, but those are not going to be very effective against squirrels. They can come up and under the tree so easily. There are, for example, on date palms, you can get sheet metal and place around the trunk of the tree so that as a squirrel or a rat in that case is climbing up the tree, they get to this sheet metal and they can't pass that and they can't get up to the fruiting area. But unfortunately, squirrels are usually jumping from walls onto your tree and can access your plants very easily. So there's no easy answer on squirrels.
Yep, that's a tough one. Let's see, I have a very steep slope and would like to landscape it. When is the best time or best way to plant that? And they also asked for some tips about hiring a landscaper. I did tell somebody else that we don't recommend particular landscaping companies. And one of our classes we did this year was about planning a landscaping and factors to consider.
You know, slopes, I always recommend on a slope is have a mixed planting. Having a single planted material, first of all, it's boring. Second of all, you run the risk of the singular ground cover of it being some sort of a disease or a heat problem and losing the entire thing. If you have mixed plantings, you reduce that risk. It's much more interesting, and you'll be providing again for wildlife throughout the year by having different plants there. Now, as far as resources, as I said, California Gardens, it used to be called Rancho Santa Ana Gardens. If you go to their website, California Gardens, I think they still have available a list of plants, native plants for planting on slopes. They have an entire list of slope planting, and that would be a good resource. Otherwise, the California Native Plant Society also is going to be, you can distinguish there and choose what type of plants you want. And you can choose ground covers, trees, shrubs, and pick the type of plant and come up with lists from that. There are other options out and other nurseries where we can put in zip codes perhaps and come up with lists as well. Okay.
Let's see. Someone asked about whether a vegetable planting seminar is planned. If you go to yourscvwater.com/gardening classes, you can see the videos from the classes we've had already. We did have a vegetable gardening class earlier this year. and what's planned for the rest of the year. So you can find that information there. Someone asked, do you recommend the Chinese snowball snowball bush as a bush for this climate?
The viburnum, those plants are the snowball, probably where you're at is going to be a little hot for it. The viburnums themselves, I remember having them at Descanso Gardens and they didn't really flourish there that well. So probably not the best choice on the viburnums.
I have yellow aphids on my mandevilla every year. Any suggestions?
So the first defense against aphids, of course, is to wash them off with a strong stream of water. Being a master gardener, I promote fewer chemicals and trying to do things very simply. So as soon as you notice those, and then you stay on top of it and regularly wash those off with that strong stream of water is your best defense. Now, beyond that, there are things that we can do, but temperatures are an issue because if it's too hot, oils, for example, that we can use to smother insects, but we can't use those when it's hot. We also have insecticidal soaps that that desiccate them. Again, we can't use those in the heat of the sun. So again, your best defense is simply washing them off with a stream of water.
Okay, and we just have 2 or 3 more before we finish those. I do want to let people know there is a section that should be in your little dashboard for GoToWebinar for the handout, and it has a PDF of what Steve has presented today. Sometimes people have, depending on your equipment, aren't able to access it, and you can send me an email at kmartin@scvwa.org, and I can email that to you if you can't see it here. Okay. Are there any trees that would do well on a slope? Got several different people here that have slopes.
Yeah, right. And so again, whether you're looking at going more towards the native plant materials, which is what I would recommend, of course, mixed planting, checking out the appropriate websites as I mentioned. There are many that can work. Again, mixed large shrubs may be better than trees, large shrub material rather than trees. You have to think of maintenance, of course, over the years, getting up to that area to maintain that tree if it needs to be pruned and so on. Access is very important.
And so there's another slope maintenance question. Speaking of that, she has myoporum.
Right.
She has tall grassy weeds that grow through the myoporum, and she can't figure out how to weed this on the slope without hurting the good plants.
That's a problem. Of course, one of the things would be identifying what type of weed that it is, because there are some herbicides that are out there that are specific to particular types of weeds. So nothing else, taking a sample to a local nursery. Now, whenever you have a weed or a pest or a disease and you're taking it to a nursery to get it identified, you always want to put it into a sealed plastic bag when you go to a nursery, because you don't want to be transmitting any diseases or pests to the nursery. All right, so keep that in mind. Very, very important. But go to your local nursery; they can help you identify that. And I think you have Green Thumb Nursery out there, which is a good outfit, and they might be able to help you out with a proper remedy for that.
Okay. Someone said they're clicking on the handout but getting an error message. Yeah, that is something that comes up. I'm going to put my email in the chat so that everybody has it, and you can email me for the handout. It looks like there's just one more we haven't got to. Somebody was asking about if they're growing flowers for the purpose of harvesting them. Is there a best time of year to plant those?
So if you're looking for like a spring flower garden, and then yes, those would generally be planted in late winter and to get established. And of course, some even have earlier planting times. Some planted from seed, maybe planted in late fall, early winter, and they start to grow during that time, and then come early spring, you have your flowering plant. So I would suggest looking at your package of seeds, and they're going to give you a hint there. They'll have a little map that shows our region, and it will tell the best time to plant those seeds, whether it be fall or spring.
All right, I think we got through them all, Steve. We really appreciate your time and your expertise here.
My pleasure.
Everyone, thank you. Everyone, we've got next month is Water-saving turf care and turf substitutes.
And I may be doing that, I think, possibly.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, that's a really timely one.
yeah, good.
That's a really timely one with the drought upon us. We have a lawn replacement rebate program, and you want to be sure if you're thinking about taking advantage of that, there is a starting point where you have to still have green grass before you apply. So don't let it die before you check out our program on our website, and then tune in next month and learn how to do that.
Great.
All right. Anything else?
Been my pleasure, guys, and hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.